Welcome to the Masterclass Series facilitated by the UC MBA program and Executive Education. Today we're talking to Hamish Duff about why digital transformations fail. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Kia ora, Samis. Thanks for that introduction. I'm an independent technology management specialist, so that essentially means I work with small and medium-sized businesses to help them to use technology more effectively in their business and to position their businesses for that future of rapid technology change.
You're also the industry lead on the MBA Digital Transformation and Technology Preparedness course, and we teach that course together, don't we?
That's right, and it's actually a thrill. I say it's an honour to be a part of that and to be able to share my 25 years of technology experience with senior managers from all around Canterbury in that class. I think it's really exciting.
You look at all the technology trends and everything that's happening and how industries and companies need to really gear themselves for these new technologies.
That's right. I think it's understood from a lot of people. They don't understand just how fast technology is changing and the pressures that puts on a modern business. The technology is rapidly changing. It's just not evenly distributed. We're not seeing all of the latest technologies available to every business yet. I think it's quite a challenge for bigger companies, especially because the larger firms that I've worked with certainly are much slower to move, much slower to adapt and adopt new technologies. They've encumbered by that status quo of how things are done here that's been developing over 25 or 30 years, and that can be a significant detractor in success in these projects.
So what's that statistic that you said?
Well, they say that 70% of all digital transformations fail, whether they failed to achieve the objectives of the project or whether they failed to live up to the expectations of the business is probably the distinction. And I would say it's more the latter than the former, because business executives' expectations of what a digital transformation or a digital intervention can do for their organisations are often quite different from what is practical and pragmatic to be done within their organisation. I say it all the time in my class and I repeat it over and over, as technology is not the silver bullet people think it is, and implementing technology won't solve your business problems. You need to take business changes and make business decisions to change your approach to your business operating model in order to take advantage of that technology, not just simply implement technologies.
You and I always debate this term digital transformation, and it's actually highly contested in the literature as well. But what does that actually mean, right?
In a lot of organisations, digital transformations are simple point solutions that change one operating aspect of their business. They may be transforming that operation, but they're not transforming the entire business approach. We see quite a difference, I think, between digital transformation and how it's spoken about with corporates and large budgets and large staff who are applied to a project versus that SME environment where actually it's usually about transforming a process at a time and working towards a longer roadmap, a longer term change. Most of the small and medium-sized firms that we come to start working with are typically running on a system. They've maybe got their inventory management system, and then the rest of the business is running on spreadsheets that are tacked on around that. And that's very common in the small and medium-sized environment, that they've digitized some processes and put some information into spreadsheets, but they still don't have a joined up view of their data or an understanding of the data that drives the purchasing decisions from their customers or drives operational efficiency for their organisation.
Well, you told me a really good story where this is concerned.
Yeah, so this is a manufacturing client, and that manufacturing client has got a process by which their customers can say, I think I'm going to order those products, you'll call them widgets. I think I'll order those widgets in 6 months' time. So can you make sure that you've got the manufacturing time for my order into that schedule in a few months' time? Well, over time, all of the customers who want that lead time to be shortened on their manufacturing put in these early orders where they're managing to keep those orders in the process so they could have an ETA for their product. And actually they end up swamping the manufacturing process. So we remove all of those and we automate the scheduling of their manufacturing process, then actually their lead time goes from 6 months down to only 6 weeks. Wow. Which is a dramatic improvement in that customer experience, which is one of the things we focus on in digital transformation. So a relatively simple change which looks on the surface like it is going to negatively impact on a customer experience, actually improves the throughput and improves the utilisation in the factory and improves that customer experience overall. I think it's really powerful. By allowing that customer to have that flexibility and put in their order when it hasn't been signed and hasn't been confirmed, actually creates a whole lot of downstream issues for requirements planning for the manufacturing process and for changes to that order.
Yeah.
You know, how often will the order come through and actually be double the quantity or half the quantity, therefore affect all of the downstream manufacturing orders? It's a really significant problem to deal with. And at the moment, in this organisation, all of those issues are dealt with manually by good staff who are working very, very hard.
So this comes really to our point. This sounds like a very eloquent solution that is going to be good for everybody involved, yet the rollout will be quite significant because it's lots of people who used to do something in one way, now doing something in a different way. And stuff goes wrong, right? We always know it goes wrong, and it just fails to meet this beautiful promise that you now promise. This is what your process is going to look like. Now, what goes wrong?
In this way, it's hopefully not going to, to fail to meet their promises. What goes wrong? Across 25 years of projects and seeing IT projects, I've seen an awful lot of failures. And that stat of 70% that failed to meet expectations is reflected in my experience with it. And I think there's several things that I think cause really significant issues. If I can again use some stories from that consulting past, so I can try and relate these. One client who were doing a very complex ERP implementation. That's an enterprise resource planning implementation, so the system that runs the whole organisation and its financials. They decided to choose the most engaged and most busy and important people within their organisation to inform the requirements of that project. So they went to some of these key people, subject matter experts, they called them, within the organisation. They took them out of their normal day job. These people are very busy for a reason, they're very competent. They took them out of their day job and backfilled them with staff that were new to the organisation and had to be trained up. So that's a significant challenge by itself. But then spent the next couple of years working with these subject matter experts and developing what that ERP would look like when it went live, only for it to go live and to discover that they'd picked the wrong people. Those people didn't have the breadth of understanding and knowledge about all the operating processes of the organisation, so therefore when they went live they were missing critical parts of the operation. Significant problem. And in that case, I think it was another $15 million investment to get it back on track. So significant money there. Very large organisation.
Well, I think you've touched on two key things: who leads the change, but also that upfront planning, and maybe just spending a wee bit more time in that upfront planning, making sure that all the key decision makers have been consulted, you have a really clear view, but then also maybe almost contradictory to your instinct is who to choose to run with that change. You would think that it's that business leader, it's that busy person, like you said, but actually...
Well, there's a couple of points there I'll touch on. So yes, the business leaders in that case were not tech savvy. They didn't understand the implications of the decisions that were being made. Secondly, and segueing off that, they brought in a team of consultants and experts to do the implementation. Those consultants, sure, they brought some best practices for how to run a large manufacturing operation. They brought in some expertise with them. However, the organisation, because they weren't technically savvy and didn't understand the capabilities of the system that was being implemented, they abdicated their responsibility for making business decisions to these partners. So therefore the partners were making mission critical business decisions based off their experience with other organisations, and that's a significant risk for any organisation. In this case, the partners did not understand the entire operation of the organisation. They didn't understand enough to be able to drive the right best practices into the organisation.
Yeah, and you would say they didn't understand what the value is that clients actually get. So really not understanding that business value, and so not making the right decisions.
Absolutely.
But I want to go back 1 second and say, but do we really need tech-savvy people implementing? Because sometimes the very tech-savvy people and the IT team, with all due respect, is not as well-balanced as you are, in the sense that they don't necessarily go to that strategic level, because that's where these projects need to sit, right? At the strategic level, not at the operational level.
There's a theme here with IT people and developers especially, and I've run several development teams in the past, so I'm an IT geek, definitely, and happy to be so, is that we love complexity, and we love to be useful and to say yes and to make exciting and innovative solutions. And in a lot of organisations, if you have the business team with a wish list of all the things that they would like to implement for their digital transformation, that wish list is not related to the capabilities of the system that's being implemented at all. So, so there's a real disconnect there. But then you get a team of IT people who are super clever, no doubt about that at all, and love that complexity, will say yes and will make it work and will create a whole lot of complexity within the organisation as they're implementing the tool to do all the bells and whistles that have been requested, versus having the business understanding to be able to take a step back and say, why, repeatedly? Why are you doing that, taking that approach? How is that going to add value? How's that going to change the customer experience? How's that going to improve productivity? And quite often the wish lists of things to be implemented have been bubbling away based on the system that was being used at the moment, let alone what the actual what is actually required, what capabilities are required in order to support the business into the future.
Yeah.
So there's quite a shift there required, and that's not necessarily an understanding of the tech. It's an understanding of the capabilities of the technology and what those capabilities can enable within the business. I think that's where it's most important. It's not, again, the technology is not the silver bullet.
Yeah.
The technology supports new ways of working and new ways of operating.
Well, I think it also talks to kind of the skill development that's needed in the market now, especially for these kind of broader projects. It's definitely that T skill set where you have some deeper knowledge within maybe the systems, etc., but also to be able to talk to different areas of the business and just understand not just, operations necessarily or the systems, but also the business's responsibility towards sustainability, their goals around that, just the overall business strategy, accounting functions, etc.
We talk about having senior buy-in as being a critical success factor for digital transformation programs, and I think that's where that comes into play, because the senior executives are really the only people in the organisation who have that across the organisation holistic view of what's important for the whole organisation versus what's important for any particular silo. You probably know from your own corporate experience that every part of every silo within a corporate thinks that they're the most important part, that they're the ones who are driving the engine, from your HR to your IT to the finance team, that they think that they're the ones who are in control and are really delivering the best value. In reality, we need to look right across to look at how these technologies will change that entire operating model, the entire process. Yeah. That's where you'll get most value from it.
So this is an important segue into something that you and I talk about a lot, and that is the role of leadership. So we've hinted at kind of who leads these processes and how important it is to understand that why behind it. Simon Sinek's work on start with why, right, doesn't change because it's a technology implementation. But can you speak a little bit more and tell us some stories around just the role of leadership within this whole digital transformation process?
Leadership is important to set the scene and to remove obstacles and to keep the project moving forwards and to set the right objectives and standards for the project as well. However, actually where I want to touch on is something slightly different, where more often than not I see leaders within organisational change projects such as digital transformation saying, this is the top priority for the organisation and everybody needs to be behind it. We're all going to be working towards that. However, a week after the start of the initiation of the project, they'll be almost always assigning additional projects and additional project work to the team. So within an organisation, I think that's one of the real keys that a leader needs to understand. If you've got an important project that's delivering on strategic value for the organisation, and really these projects are exactly that, they're strategically important projects, that we need to be able to allocate staff to it and give them the headspace to be able to focus on the project and not focus on another 10 projects at the same time.
Yeah.
That's very, very rare in organisations, and I think only the largest organisations that I've worked with have had the wherewithal to be able to assign a team of people to the project. More often than not, they assign a single person who's the internal champion, and usually a project manager as well, to the project, and then bring in resources from outside. So it's I think the wrong approach for obtaining long-term strategic value. We need to be able to build those skill sets within the organisation to skill transfer from external partners to your internal team, and to then recruit longer term the resources that are going to help support the organisation. So data awareness, data savvy staff who can then look at what's being created and look at the data that's being produced and help the organisation to make better decisions, those sorts of skills.
Yeah, so really be brave as leaders, I suppose, in protecting that team, and also just reminding them all the time about why and what they're busy with, and keeping everybody on track, but also just setting that culture.
Yeah.
And I think a really important one that we haven't spoken about is just the sharing of information. So we know that whenever there's big change, people go into this almost fight or flight mode, or the threat rigidity response. So they buckle down and they do things exactly like they used to do them, even though maybe it's a new context and a new process and we need for them to change. And the second part is we buckle down in terms of our information that we hold on to. So both of those things really critical aspects that influence implementation.
Absolutely.
And I think leaders have such a key role in really just making that communication platforms such a big focus of the whole thing.
If I can speak to that first one, the resistance that we get from staff when they're going into a project like this, more often than not, they hate the existing system. They are singing from the rooftops about all the issues they're encountering and how it's not fit for purpose and it needs to change. Then no matter how good the new system is, and no matter how many of those issues are addressed and risks are mitigated, they still hate it. They will still resist using it. And that's essentially because it's a change to their habits and their behaviours, their pattern of work that they get into, that comfort spot where they get into doing the same process over and over and over again. Even if that's a horribly manual and repetitive process, people sometimes quite like those parts of their roles.
Yeah.
Well, again, we've spoken about it before, that we're heading into a time where all of those repetitive tasks that we do are going to be automated. That might be 5 years away, that might be 10 years away, but the time periods we're talking about are relatively short. And there's an awful lot of most corporate roles, which is repeated processes, standard operating procedures. So those standard operating procedures are likely to be processes that are targets for automation. So hopefully removing some of that repetitive work from their workload. The piece that the process I always target when I talk about this is accounts payable. And many organisations, there's somebody whose job it is to bring in the invoices from the vendors and suppliers and enter all those vendor invoice details into a system and then process the invoice for payment. And these days that's an automated system that reads PDF and enters the system, the data in. It just needs to be checked by a human, otherwise it's processed automatically. And I find that's, some organisations, that's a week out of somebody's month that they don't have to do work anymore. So we need to be able to look at those people and retask them into other parts of the organisation.
But I think there's where the disconnect is. So if you're an employee and you did that before, that was your responsibility, you think that your value lies in the knowledge that you have around that system, that process, etc. So you hold on to it, and we almost weaponize information, and the more complex we can make a process and the more unattainable to automate we can make a process, the more we feel that we'll be valuable as people.
Absolutely.
Yet I think that's where the disconnect is, to let your people know what it is that you value in them. I don't value you sitting and doing that for a week. What I really value is you project managing this, or you potentially playing a relationship role or something like that. And I think that's where it also falls short, is really taking that people approach to technological change, where you talk to people around, this is what I really want you to focus on, because this is what I feel your strength is, versus this repetitive task. And I don't need you. I don't need you to do that. I want to take that away from you. And yet when we take it away from people, there's really that almost that hole afterwards, that there's a loss that they experience, even if it's a loss of a bad thing. And also understanding that loss and that emotion that goes with that, and almost the readjustment and taking people through that adjustment phase.
Absolutely. If I can speak to, again, a story about an experience of exactly that, working with a sales team who create a custom bespoke product for their customers. And they are essentially the pre-sales engineers, and they developed the engineering for this product. I won't name names or anything, obviously, but their perception was that they were doing a fully bespoke product for every customer. And actually, on analysis of the data, there's a lot of variability in that product, but it's variability within boundaries. So actually, we can turn that product into a configured product which has multiple options for each level of the product design. So they might be choosing, for example, we've got a desk in front of us, we might be choosing what type of top that desk has and what type of base it has, and does it have any electronics embedded in the top of it, and those sorts of things. But those choices add up very rapidly. We multiply those out to become variants. In this case, this had to be bespoke product that they were developing and designing for every single customer order, weighed down to about 20 choices that each had a range of options each, and came out over 20 million different variants.
Wow.
So therefore, from a customer perspective, they're getting massive variability in a custom designed product. From an internal systems perspective, we've got standardized processes and a modular bill of materials, and modular, we know how long that's going to take to manufacture, and we therefore have all of that information that helps to improve the processes internally, while still giving that appearance to the customer as a great customer experience.
Yeah.
Now, the sales team in that case did not or do not like their value of their bespoke product being taken away from them. However, this process is probably going to only suit 70 or 80%, maybe even less, maybe 60% of their product that they're selling. It's still going to mean the automation and streamlining and much faster quotation and sales for 60% of their work. And it should free them up then to spend the time on the real bespoke product, the real where they really add value, and consequentially where the organisation really gets its profit from.
Yeah.
So streamline and standardise where it's possible, where it makes sense, working with those people who are resistant and getting them really involved in that process, versus just standardising the whole thing. And actually we're getting the best of both worlds. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater in that case.
So we've spoken about people, we've spoken about leadership, but I think a really important thing that we also need to talk about is just data and the quality of your data, because that's central to all of this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually that's where a lot of these projects become unstuck, because the data that's inside the systems that they've been using for some significant period of time is dirty data. It's probably got customers or vendors in the data which don't exist anymore and haven't been used for a long time. That's almost always the case. Then it's likely to have inventory that's not up to date, that's not real, that's not available anymore. You know, that's always a significant issue to get that data into the system. We always say garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
If you're going through a digital transformation project, there always has to be a data cleansing approach. However, it's best if that data cleansing approach is done at the same time as you're looking at your overall data management in the organisation. Who owns that data? Who manages it? Who's responsible for its accuracy long term?
Yeah.
It can't just be up to a system to manage. It can't just be up to one person to manage either. We have to be able to spread those responsibilities to be able to ensure that data quality continues to be going into the future. Garbage in, garbage out. When we're implementing a new system like an ERP, we're changing the operation, but we're also changing the data that's captured from the operation. And I think that's really the key enabler here for a future-focused organisation, to be able to have good data quality that then informs decisions about their business management or about the operations, and continues to inform those into the future. And of course, in today's world, we're moving into big data and analytics and having much stronger tools for doing the analysis. It's no longer just reporting data that happened last month and figuring out what went wrong and figuring out what needs to happen. That was the old school reporting way of data.
Yeah.
Now we're looking at trends and analytics and seeing the KPIs of the organisation and what needs to have attention on it right now in order to correct course, rather than that backwards looking reporting is kind of old school these days.
Yeah.
So getting good data quality, getting it into a system, and then learning how to use that data most effectively in order to drive business decisions is really a critical element there. So.
Yeah, and I actually think that bridge is quite a steep learning curve because you have data in the organization, everybody has data, and you have business decisions that you make, but it's almost going, what are the business decisions I need to make? And what data do I need to get in order to make those critical business decisions?
Absolutely.
And actually looking at it from a business decision point of view versus saying, here's a big pool of data that I have. What decisions can I make based on this data? You should actually start with the strategy first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, once again, we're moving into a period where the tools that are available for a SME are increasingly powerful. Where even in the past scenario where they had very disparate systems and lots of satellite systems and that data couldn't easily be joined up. We're moving into that modern data and analytics where they could have a data lake where they pull all of the key operational data into one place, make sense of it and then report on it there, versus having one system that manages everything.
Yeah.
And of course, as those one systems that manage everything, the ERPs become more mature and more accessible for SMEs, we're able to get all of the data into one place. It becomes even more powerful to then do predictive analysis and say what types of customers are our most profitable customers out the other end.
Yeah.
Which products are actually costing us more to produce than we're earning in terms of margin.
Yeah.
It's really important information, but for a lot of SMEs with those disparate systems and lots of information, often spreadsheets on people's personal laptops or desktops,
Yeah.
that's very, very hard to do any kind of joined up reporting like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. So,
Well, data lake or data lake house, I suppose.
data lake house with a boat.
And a ferry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that is one of the key things. So let's get into that section of today's talk. What are the key things that you as a business can start focusing on now in order to make sure that your chances of success for a digital transformation project is greater?
Well, that's great timing, Els, for me, because we've just finished the final assignment for the year for the MBA course, and that assignment asked students to use a subject organisation and to create what we call a digital roadmap or a digital blueprint for that organisation, which includes what is their current state and where are they now. I think that's really important to the organisation. And actually, I usually start with an engagement to do an inventory of all of the systems and all of the business processes, and which business processes are adding value within the organisation to the customer or to productivity, internal operational efficiency. And I think that's really important, to have that understanding of where you are now.
An assessment of your digital maturity.
Yeah,
as
I think
it may.
that's probably the next step I would do. So
Yeah.
I would do a technology inventory of what we've got right now, because it's really important to know where all the working parts are right now.
Yeah.
Then a digital maturity and digital leadership assessment then leads on from that to what's our current state, what's our attitude towards technology, where do we need to improve the understanding of that technology and how it's going to add value. And I think that's, again, a lot of business executives are not data savvy, are not system savvy. They've got technical people who do the technical work for them and they don't understand the value that it's going to add. I think that's really important.
But I think that's important though, that and I think this is also where a disconnect happens, is managers and CEOs and think that because they're not tech savvy that they can't necessarily make those decisions. But essentially it's all strategy. It's still strategy based, business decision based, and your questions might be different. So how can I get data to support this, or how can we automate this, or something like that? But those business foundations stay the same, don't they?
we're back to, again, business, that technology is not a silver bullet and
That's
doesn't
right.
solve the business issues. Again, we're back to, this is a change project, and just like any other change project, although this one is supported by new technologies and new capabilities to help the work in new ways, that's no different from any other org change project we've implemented for years.
Yep.
It's just now happening at a more rapid pace. The technology is changing more rapidly. Yeah.
So definitely assessment of where you are at the moment.
Yes.
Start thinking very clearly about your data infrastructure, because
Absolutely.
that's going to be the foundation of whatever project happens next.
Absolutely. So there's always an element in these programs of quick wins or fixes to current issues. And more often than not with our clients, it's that initial implementation of a system or a platform that gets them into with all those hygiene factors we talked about before, with all of the key functions that they need to operate their business first. There's always gaps in those systems and processes, in my experience of it. So getting them into a strong platform upon which they can then adapt and evolve their business operation, and do that with some strong data to be able to understand. I think that's a really important piece.
Because we don't do that, right? We appoint people and then we say, solve this problem, but we don't often ask them, please map out this process. What do you do? What are the key decisions that you
Absolutely.
make? And people don't share that. And again, once you start automating those processes, then that change is so dramatic, because you're almost trying to get whatever is in their head into, but if it's institutionalized, that you map out that process, everybody knows what the process is, we can all have an input on how to improve that process, whether it's digitized or not.
Absolutely.
I think sharing that information and really being intentional about mapping out processes and procedures is really important.
I think it's really important for alignment of the team around the project as well, because more often than not, if you go into an organisation, there are 10 sales teams, same sales staff members, there'll be 10 different sales processes being used. There's no standardisation of approach, there's no best practice there's no standard metrics that can be pulled out because of all those different approaches, and that's a real challenge. You mentioned again about that reluctance to share information. I've found with organisations, sometimes we'll be a year into a project and then I learn about a process that's critical to them that they just haven't mentioned in an entire year. And that's that assumed knowledge. It's they're in the organisation and they've been working on those processes for a long period of time. So that status quo and how things have always been done here is up here. It's not something that they can articulate easily, because they're unpicking all of these processes that they've been building and working on for a long time.
And I think it's good practice, even if you're not going into a digital transformation project or anything like that. It's really good practice to build in that time for reflection, to say these are our assumed pieces of the job, and this is what I assume, and just to compare that and to say, where can I improve?
Absolutely.
You know,
checking those assumptions and checking those constraints and seeing how they are affected by the technologies that we're implementing is always a key as well, because some of those constraints and assumptions that you make about your operations are simply not relevant anymore in the new technology world.
That's right. That's right.
So we were in those steps before. We were talking about the initial current state and your digital maturity. And I think it's really important to get the right team around the program who will help guide it and manage it going forwards. We always talk about change management. We talk about change governance. Having the right leadership team, that's not necessarily all senior leaders, but having the right team involved who can lead that project, who will inform that project, who will be involved with aligning all of the different changes that are going on with the overall program objectives and the benefits you're trying to achieve for the organisation is probably the next step that I would take. It's really important to have the right team around that.
And upskilling that team, but I also think digital change, companies need to realise, is a colorless change. So it's not a blue collar change or a white collar change. Everybody in the organisation needs to change. And I think understanding that you also need to build people's DQ, so not their IQ, not only their IQ and their EQ is important, but also their digital intelligence. So it's really important that the whole organization buys in and understand this changed environment that we live in now, and those technological forces bringing in change and our chances of disruption, and understanding why it's important to change. Because also we've seen that most digital transformations, the team that drives that change, there's massive churn within that.
I think these projects can be incredibly high pressure and incredibly stressful, especially for internal team members. They're more often than not being asked to make decisions which they might understand some of the long-term implications, but actually they're typically a lot of people out of their depth and struggling with the level of change and struggling with the complexity and the responsibilities that are lumped on them in one of these projects. And that can be really quite hard to manage for an internal staff member especially. But that's one of the reasons we get that staff turnover, that people just get burnt out by the fact that these projects are pretty intense and pretty hard to work on. And I think there's always going to be some churn there as people decide that it's not for them and they'll go in a different direction.
But also, we think that these change projects is going to take a year or 6 months or 8 months, but because it's such a big project, most of these digital transformations and these bigger processes take way longer than that, right? And It's just setting that expectation at the beginning, just to say we're running a marathon, let's pace ourselves, let's look at those short-term wins, just to keep everybody energized.
Everybody thinks that this is like IT implementations of old, where we put in a new system and there's a big project and there's a capital spend on that project.
Yeah.
A digital transformation is not a one-time project. It's an evolution of the company. It's an iterative process. You'll need to continue. You're embedding these new behaviours and you're continually improving processes using the technology. So it's not a one-time project. This is not a done and dusted at the end of it. It's the starting point, getting the right fundamentals in place. And I think that's really important to understand.
Thank you, Hamish. As always, so much fun to talk to you.
Likewise.
And we're super fortunate to have you on the MBA program with us and teaching into executive education as well.
Thank you, Elsemarie. Really appreciate it.